Hi, I'm Joe Puckett. Thanks for joining me. I want to talk to you about the truth of mass shootings, church mass shootings through a recent study. Are we being told the truth? I hope you'll stick with me. We're going to look at the actual data and where that comes from. The actual data comes from the National Institute of Justice did a great study, and they started in 1966, and they've gone through the present with the help of the Violence Prevention Project. Those links are down in the description so you can get to that stuff. 20%, when we talk about mass shootings, this is going to be the foundation for getting to the church stuff. The 20%, the Violence Project database spans more than 50 years, yet 20% of the mass shootings in that period occurred in the last 5 years. This is a huge study. And really, we're really seeing the increase in the violence in the last few years. More than half of the shootings have occurred since 2000 when we talk about mass shootings. 1970s, on average, there were 8 lives per year that were lost due to mass shootings. 1980s, there were 15 lives, and you can see down through there. And we're talking about today, on average, there's 51 lives per year that are lost. So huge increase here. No doubt about it. Violence is becoming a bigger deal in our communities and in our landscape, our churches, our workplaces, that kind of thing. And obviously, we're focused more on the churches, but we got to use the basis to get to that. So most common mass shootings are 28% are in workplaces, 14% in bars, nightclubs, restaurants, retail establishments, and then we see churches, houses of worship, 6.4%. So of all these mass shootings, we only see 6.4% of them in houses of worship. Now we're talking about mass shootings here. So we are talking about where there's multiple people that are shot, killed, injured. And so we're not talking about the one-offs either, where there's one person that's shot. So keep that in mind as we look at these statistics and these numbers. 7.6% are in grade schools through high schools. 5.3% of these mass shootings are in colleges, universities. 2.9 government buildings, civic places, and then the rest are in other spaces, other public spaces, streets, neighborhoods, camps, those kinds of things, according to this study. More mass shootings occur in the U.S. South and West than in the Midwest or the Northeast. And 64% of houses of worship shootings took place in southern states, Texas, Louisiana, South Carolina. I think Texas has the most, according to this study. And then you look at mass shooter demographics, and these begin to be very important to us. So there's at least one stat here, and then some more coming up. 97% of mass shooters are male, very, very few females. So we want to begin to collect that in our mind. 11 to 70 years old is the average of the ages, with a mean of 34.1 years of age. Perpetrators had 64.5% had a prior criminal record, 62.8% had a history of violence, and 27.9% of those people had domestic violence history, those that had a history of violence. And that goes over 100% because many of the suspects have multiple of these indicators or history. 28.5 had military history. 80% of mass shooters were in crisis, which basically means, if you look at the definition of that, their current situation was overwhelming their ability to cope. 30% were suicidal prior to shooting, prior to this incident, and 39% were suicidal during. And, suicide is part of this. If we really look at what we're talking about, I mean, it's hard to deny they go in being suicidal because they're either going to be shot and killed, or they're going to be going to prison for the rest of their life, which is a different form of suicide as far as I'm concerned. So that's their mindset. They know they're going to be locked away. 19.8% had a history of hospitalization for psychiatric reasons. Now, pay attention to this stuff because it's going to come to some suggestions, and I don't want you to question why I'm suggesting this. And I also want to say here that I am not criticizing those having mental health issues. I'm only quoting the study, and I'm really looking out for calling some attention to the fact that you and I need some training on this topic. So I want to try to prevent this stuff. And I also, being in a ministry And I want to encourage you, as being a member of ministry, that we're trying to find these folks and try to help them. So I'm not just throwing out, don't leave comments like you do sometimes where you're criticizing me for getting after people with mental health issues. It's not that. It's that we have to identify them. We have to pay attention to this because there is some causation factors here that we want to analyze, but it's also calls it to our attention to try to help. 29% had a history of counseling. 23.3% have taken psychiatric meds. These are the percentages of the mass shooters in this huge study, the 1966 to present study. 15.7 showed evidence of mood disorder diagnosis. 26.7% showed evidence of psychotic disorder. Here's some more very important information. I want you to pay attention to this. My suggestion: mass shooter demographics, 48% leaked their plans in advance. So these folks told somebody, gave little hints, left little signs on their social media, told family, friends a little bit, dropped some ideas of this. 48%, so almost half of them gave us some idea ahead of time that they were going to engage in a mass shooting. 23.4% left behind a manifesto or a legacy token. 70%, now this is very interesting, 70% knew at least some of their victims. So that's a high percentage of these folks knew at least some of their victims. So that's interesting when it comes to mass shootings at churches. Have they been going to our church? Do they know some people that are there? And if you really study these incidents, you will find that they knew someone that attended, or they had family that attended that church, or they had attended that church for a while. You'll see those kinds of signs if you take a look at the data just a little bit more. 77.2% used handguns. So those of you planning scenarios and stuff, here's a big cue for you. Almost 80% of these folks are using handguns. So if you're planning for rifles, and I know I hear people talk about we need long guns at our church, got one out in my car, we've got one in the closet. The reality is a majority of these incidents are occurring with handguns. 48% used one gun, 22% used two guns, and then 15% used three guns, and another 15% used four or more guns in the process of this mass shooting. Mass shooter data shows that nearly all the mass shooters were in a state of crisis in the days or weeks prior to the shooting. They were in a state of crisis. And that state of crisis, and that's nearly all, according to the study, not my words, their words. That crisis that they were in was due to a job loss, relationship ending, mental health issues, or another stressor, another issue in their life. What do we need to know as churches? And this is the data I want to take away from this with you to try to help you for your planning, for your scenarios, for your mindset, and training. We're always talking about what kind of training we need. And a lot of times we get focused on practicing our shooting and going through drills and stuff like that with our firearms. When I want to propose to you, if we look at these stats, that's not necessarily the biggest thing we need to be practicing. What we need to know as churches, as church security members, active threat candidates, as we've been talking about, 97% were males. They were in, almost all of them were in crisis, according to the study: job loss, relationships ending, mental health, another stressor. So we begin to see here where you and I might could detect some of this. We have somebody that visits our church. Something seems like it's not right. And all of a sudden, in talking to them, in doing what I call a coffee walk to go down and get some free coffee or free donut, we end up hearing something from them about how they've lost their job and things aren't going right. We need to pay attention to that stuff. That becomes very important for us when we begin to look at this person and deal with them. They're in crisis. They have, according to the study of actual incidents, so this isn't fluff, a majority have a history of violence or they have a criminal history. and some domestic violence in there with, what was it, 27%. Many of these folks are suicidal, and we might argue that a majority of them are suicidal. They have mental health issues, and they knew some of the victims. And I'm still struggling a little bit. I put the in there because I'm still struggling with that idea of they knew some of their victims, because I do know incidents where we did not see a connection, but we showed that a high percentage, 70%, knew someone there. So they visited the church before, they knew somebody at the church, family goes to the church, friends go to the church. So a high percentage know some of their victims. So something important to keep in mind. Here's what we need to know, and here's what I'm proposing to you. When we look at all these mental health issues, we're more important. This is the important stuff. Is that it's maybe even more important than the shooting aspect. Is we need to be taking some crisis intervention training. To recognize danger, to reduce it, to offer disruption, distress someone. And so we need some dealing with mentally ill persons training. That's my big point. And we can do the de-escalation training, and many of you are doing that, verbal excellence training. And we're doing some of that. We're doing the verbal communication stuff. But I'm proposing to you that we need some dealing with mentally ill folks training. We need to try to help them. And I'm not just targeting them, although I'll get the comments. I know I will in the comments below, but I am wanting to help them as well. I want to be able to see what's going on, and I want to be able to prevent issues and help them ahead of time. If I can see somebody that's under stress, that's in crisis, and I can pull them off to the side and talk to them in a loving way and help them, then I've won. I've won. I've helped them. And then I've also prevented some violence potentially. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm looking at here. And that's what I want to see for you and I. So we need some training in this area. Now, I'm not talking about the 40-hour CIT training that police go through. And I'm not talking about another 8 hours of dealing with mentally ill persons and another 8 hours of verbal excellence and another 4 hours of de-escalation training. I'm not talking about taking like 60 hours worth of training. I'm talking about getting some training wherever you can find to get some of that training. We need to get a little bit more, according to the statistics, we need to get a little bit more focused on detecting people that are having mental health and crisis issues. And also, we need to try to help them. We need to detect it, and we need to try to help them, both as a ministry, as a member of our church community. We need to help these people, detect them, and help them if we can. As a security team member or a person who's watching out for security, we need to also prevent issues. So, what churches need to know is we need to also, I recommend, a little controversial, but we may need to watch suspicious people's social media. If you get a name and you can find them on social media and they're suspicious, they seem to be having issues, or they're having issues, we should be trying to watch their social media. Check up on it. Watch what's going on. We may need a tip line. We talked about that a couple years ago, but we haven't talked about it recently. We may need to give out a phone number at our church, have a tip line that people can anonymously call and be able to say, we got a crisis going on in our family, or a person that people can contact. We saw that in Sutherland Springs, Texas, our biggest mass shooting at a church. And we saw that there had been issues going on in that family, and that maybe if somebody would have been able to call somebody, then we might have heard about it ahead of time. That's my understanding. We need to have, of course, the rest of the stuff. I'm proposing the social media, pay attention to that. I'm proposing the tip line again that we've talked about before, but I'm also talking about the other stuff that we need to really pay attention to. We need to have one armed trained member on campus. We need to have a gun on campus with a good guy or a good gal. We need to watch our parking lots and entrances, and we need the usual church security prep. That's the important stuff. Active shooters are still not likely to happen to you. 380,000 registered churches in the US, 7,000 some in Canada, wherever you're watching from. There's a lot of church campuses. So the reality is that when one is happening here and there, it's not a huge likelihood statistically that you're going to get an active shooter at your campus as well. So, but we have to be prepared, because if it does come to our campus, we can't let them run rampant without somebody there to answer that, what they're doing, or to take care of business with them. So important stuff here. The study, take a look at the links down below and check out more details if you want. I'm getting my information direct from those studies. And I just want you to be safer, and I want you to know the truth. I want you to know the facts and what you and I actually need to do about it. So thanks for watching today. Hey, please like and subscribe to the channel here. I'd like to be in communication with you and connected to you whenever we're putting out other stuff. And then I'd encourage you to take a look at this next video. It's the next one I encourage you to watch for your journey with church security.